So that's what I'm saying. The text is like an object. It's gonna change perspective based on where you're standing. I don't know.
Hello?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I missed you, baby sweet. It was a day.
It was a day.
Please tell me you're seeing this too.
From Seattle, we're Drinking the Movies. Welcome back to Drinking the Movies. Today joining me is Anna Harrison. As always, I have to introduce her as our resident Marvel expert and MCU phase writer of 1 through 3 phases. Thank you for joining me today, Anna, to talk about one of your loves, Marvel.
Thank you. Also, I want to say that I showed this, or I made a friend listen to I didn't make him. I suggested that a friend listen to the Doctor Strange podcast. And the first thing he told me was the intro was really awkward. So Eric, shout out to you for calling me awkward. I hope this is even worse.
That's a very awkward introduction that you just got finished with.
Yeah. No, that's exactly the plan.
Those carefully considered words. Very professional of you.
As always.
Well, without any more belaboring, let's get into first impressions of David O. Russell's return to the screen in Amsterdam, starring John David Washington, Margot Robbie, and Christian Bale.
Harold, I don't know what you think you're doing. Excuse me. Hello. Got a dead white man in a box. Not even a casket. Doesn't even have a top on it. In a pine box of old wood. Who do you think's gonna get in trouble here?
Do me a favor. Try to be optimistic. You don't get here without things starting a long time ago. So, 2 soldiers and a nurse found ourselves in
Amsterdam.
This is one of the finest innovations from Zurich. It removes all pain. Guys like me, we have to turn to booze and morphine, and that can lead to addiction. Oh, that's fast. That is advanced.
All right, Anna, that is the trailer for David O. Russell's Amsterdam. What do you think?
So I haven't seen a David O. Russell movie. Yeah. Sorry. So the only thing I know about him is like how he's really mean on set and like terrible. So that's the only thing I know about him. I think this looks fine. I think if the cast was not the cast, I would be less interested. But I think the fact that the cast is so stacked with a bunch of good actors and also Taylor Swift, that that is what's piquing my interest rather than the actual trailer or contents that I saw itself.
Yeah. I mean, I obviously haven't worked on a David O. Russell set, so I can't speak to that. But I think that if you look at the consistency of his collaborators, he's definitely passionate, but he doesn't seem to be as overtly toxic now as he was, especially early in his career. If you go look at the stories of like 3 Kings and stuff like that, right when he was starting out. But this is his first film back since Joy. And if you happen to see me watching this trailer for the first time just now, I depicted that word. I
did, yeah.
Love David O. Russell quite a bit. And this is what I like about him. His conversation pieces. I mean, what inspired casting to get Christian Bale wearing a prosthetic eye again? Right? First in The Big Short, now here. It can only be as good as The Big Short. Margot Robbie seemed like the more quiet link, at least on the trailer. But I really liked the sense of tone and place that I was getting from the film. And I'm probably going to absolutely love it, just as I expected.
Good. Great. I'll probably see it. I don't really know.
I hope that I can talk you into it. Is there anything else you want to say about it, or should we hop over to the trailer for Dan Trachtenberg's Prey?
I just want to say that I think it was pretty rude that all of the actors got like individual names except for Alessandro Nivola and
Matthias Schoenaerts.
Yeah, whatever. The guy, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but Farmer Oak and Far from the Madding Crowd. Wow. They should have gotten individual names too. That's all I'm saying. They deserve it.
Well, I'll forward that note to the trailer editors.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Well, without further ado, let's look at Dan Trachtenberg's Prey.
There's something out there.
I'm coming with you.
You can't.
I'm trying to protect you.
Protect me from what? It's time.
All right, Anna, our second Marvel tie-in of the day out of 2 already. Prey, which stars Amber Mid-Thunder, who was a significant character in the Marvel FX show Legion, and Dan Trachtenberg's,
Great show.
It was a fantastic show. I'm glad that you agree. I wasn't sure that you'd seen it. And Dan Trachtenberg's follow-up, I believe this is his first film since 10 Cloverfield Lane, or there may have been one in between. But what'd you think of the trailer?
Well, as I was saying before we started recording, never seen a Predator movie. So, knowing nothing, I think it looks pretty interesting. Obviously, I don't know like the deep lore or anything behind this. But I liked the like meshing of I don't know. At one point there was looked like a laser pointer on some guy's face, right? So it was like this cool meshing of like that future, like modern / futuristic technology, and then like I don't know when this is set, but like early Americas with I don't know, when is it set?
I mean, it's got to be the 1600s or earlier probably, but according to the synopsis, it's 1719 on the Great Plains.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm wrong.
Okay. Oh, anyway, like that was a cool little mashup. So it looks intriguing to me, knowing absolutely nothing about anything.
Yeah, I don't think that the lore is too important. I know that that's something that you do tend to be a fan of, but I think that the films either work or they don't work. The first Predator, I think, works immensely, and this seems to be showcasing what he did really well in 10 Cloverfield Lane, which is this kind of claustrophobic feeling. Even though we're on the Great Plains, that whole trailer made me feel like she was very much stuck and had to hide and run and fight to live, fight to survive, as the trailer put it. I don't know that as the film plays out and we see more of this CG that it'll be blended properly. There was that invisibility didn't look particularly convincing, at least on the screen that I was watching it on just now in the trailer. But you know, we'll wait to nitpick the CG until we see it.
Sure.
Well, if there's nothing else, then let's get on to Taika Waititi's Thor: Love and Thunder.
The only ones who gods care about is themselves. So this is my vow. All gods will die.
I just want to say that was very, very impressive what you did back there.
He's just my first bad guy.
You never forget your first.
You are not like the other gods of kill. Because I have something worth fighting for.
All right, Anna, I know that you don't have anything to say about Thor: Love and Thunder, so we should probably just move on to the other titles. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I concur. Although I will say, I think I have less to say about this than some others, and I think that's a bad thing.
Oh, well, at least you're willing to say it's not perfect. That's great progress.
Hey, hold on. I think I've been very willing in the past to admit things are not perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yes, but for
With, like, a
this
little
conversation and all of the critiques that I'm going to have, I think that it's gonna. I think that we may come to a clashing of heads on some takes.
Okay.
But why don't you kind of outline properly within the MCU Phase 4 and the film, kind of what the synopsis is or what's going on here?
Well, as we know, Thor he's had a lot of people die recently, and so he's a little sad. Because so his dad died. Well, first his mom died, then his dad died, then his brother died multiple times, and then Jane dumped him off screen. And Thor Ragnarok, Jane being Natalie Portman's character, who was not in Ragnarok because Natalie Portman was like, I'm done with Marvel. And then Taika Waititi was like, come back. And she was like, okay. So he's depressed. Oh gosh. It's sorry. The thing is, like, I just feel like the plots of so many Marvel movies recently have just been like, get from point A to B, and like that's it.
And add
like,
in a new side character that has superpowers by the end. Don't forget that.
But there's like no interesting detours or anything. Like, it's literally just such a straightforward whatever. That's a whole different thing. Anyway,
I have the video game complaint about this and a second film we'll talk about. But yeah, it definitely feels like Fetch Quest.
Yeah. But the film actually opens with Christian Bale, who's Gore the God Butcher, who butchers one god, I think, on screen, which is, you know, what an honorific
we
for
saw
someone. Yeah.
One butchering.
Yep. But his daughter, they're dying, and so he's praying to his god to save them, and obviously nothing happens, and his daughter dies, and then he ends up finding the god, and the god's like, I don't care. And then he finds the necro sword, which is a sword that can kill gods, and then he kills that god and is like, I hate gods because they don't do anything. And then it's like, oh, we're back to Thor. He's depressed, but it's also funny, and the Guardians of the Galaxy are there, and yeah, there's not a whole lot of connective tissue, I would say, between this and the rest of the MCU. Like, at least, like, obviously there's connection to the previous Thor movies, and the Guardians are in it for like 15 minutes. But it doesn't rely a lot on, you know, previous installments other than just having a background knowledge of the character, which that is pretty refreshing, I think. Other things, not so refreshing. But what can you do?
You can expect better.
Yeah.
Okay, that is a fair assessment of kind of the overall stuff of the film. I think that my reading of it is probably in line with yours. My sensibilities maybe are just a little bit more stern. The opening sequence with Christian Bale, I thought, looked actively bad and was a really slow, bad way to introduce the film. I understand why you would do that narratively, but I would say that a lot of these issues in the film probably do squarely belong at Taika's feet and his co-writer, who I don't remember the name of. I know she wrote Unpregnant, I think, and maybe has a couple other titles under her belt, but this is a notable departure from the I think quality writing and understanding of rules that Thor Ragnarok actually had underneath it. You know, it was from
Jennifer
the team that made it.
Caton Robinson.
Okay, there we go. And she worked on Unpregnant, right? And
yes,
a couple other features.
And
I think
Sweet Vicious, this TV show. Anywho,
yeah. So I think that the writing is kind of where the problems for this begin. And if you just go back and you look at Thor Ragnarok and the writing team there and how well they understood kind of the interplay of characters between Hulk and Thor and the worlds and everything, it was a lot more controlled within the universe to me. Whereas this is like, he figures out what's canon and then just kind of lets loose on it, you know, with the goats, which I do like seeing, but I don't know that played particularly well. And then I really think that it loses control of its tonality due to the editing. From what I could dig up, there's at least 4 editors for this film. And that's just such a mishmashing of tones. And I think it really showed up for me on the IMAX screening when they were changing aspect ratios on the Comet, particularly. It was just really, really wonky. And then there's all my problems with the CG and everything. But how do you feel about the noises that I'm making?
I mean, I feel like, well, at least for me, not to say that these criticisms of like editing and also the visual effects did look bad. There's been a consistent problem in phase 4 where I think they have simply overextended themselves, and then the visual effects almost basically across the board have not looked great. There are moments where it looks good, but I like uniformly, no. It's been a no from me.
I was reading a couple pieces. Some were like properly published. Some were just Twitter threads of artists that work for the contracted firms. I don't know if you saw any of those, where they're mocking up like multiple different ideas for the same exact scenes, and they're not getting any feedback until like a month before it all needs to be finalized.
Yeah.
And that's like unheard of for quality images. Like if you were to compare that, say, to Avatar 2, which took 10 years, like just the animation differences are glaring. And I'm sure that you know more about what the animation timelines looked like in like phase 2 and phase 3, but those CG images I think did look a lot better up until something like Black Panther, where I actively remember how bad the wall scene looked, where everybody was like sitting in a pocket in the wall during the King sequence.
At the waterfall.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely I feel like they're doing too much too fast, and I think the quality was much better when it was more controlled and slimmer. But anyway, but to say, I think a lot of my criticisms, at least with this phase 4 of the MCU so far, just because like my love of Marvel is mostly rooted in the characters. It's not like, oh, I really think that this, Iron Man 2, well, that's a bad example because that's a bad movie. Never mind. But it's less.
So you want a good movie, Thor: The Dark World?
Okay. Wow. Well, okay. But anyway, my love of Marvel is mostly rooted in like the characters and their arcs and everything. And I feel like phase 4 has kind of dropped the ball on that, where they will just kind of, I don't know, just kind of like assume that people will care about these characters from previous installations, and they don't actually give anyone anything that significant to do. Or they do, but it's like, it's hidden underneath all the plot machinations or like the bad visual effects, or I don't know. It just all seems like nothing has the weight that things kind of did in phase 1 and 2 when they were trying more to set up things. This is just kind of like, oh, we're continuing this thing and people already like it, so we're not really gonna pay attention to, we're going to have some throwaway lines about Thor pushing people away because he's lost a bunch of people, but we're never going to show any of that. We're just going to assume that people follow along and care still.
And agree.
Which is not true. And it's also very frustrating because as someone who's, again, love of the MCU is founded on the characters, to see no one really care anymore is very maddening, because I don't, again, and I had the same problem with Doctor Strange. I feel like there are very interesting kernels there, interesting places to take these characters that are right there, and then they don't really follow through on anything. So that most of my complaints about this movie come from that. But I mean, I will agree. I think also just technically it was not that great most of the time. There were a few moments where I was like, this is cool. Most of the time, no.
Yeah. So technically, I think you keep bringing up Doctor Strange. I think that's the severe thing that I would point to towards why I like that at all, and why I really don't like this is the technical proficiency that Raimi showed behind the camera. And because at some level in my head, I'm like, he can't control the things that I get to see, he like writing wise, he can only make them look the way that he wants to.
Well, as a
So-
co-writer, he actually could control what
Could he,
the writing
Feige would
was.
just let him, brutally kill people, depict it however he wanted. Like, there's, I think that he had less liberty than someone like Taika, probably,
Yeah.
based on the 2 films that I saw. And I feel like Taika's liberty that he took really doesn't actually do anything besides reinforce like the Disney conglomerate, like line of thinking, which is like populist toy sales and like vapid emptiness to bring back characters and cast a new character that younger demographics can agree that they are seeing themselves in the film at some point, which isn't empty, but it's like, for me, Jane actually did originally mean something when the first Thor came out. Like, that was
Really?
actually something that I was not too impassioned about, but I was like, okay, that's like a real person that he cares about. I even liked Kat Dennings. I had all sorts of things when the original Thor came out, and by Ragnarok, I was like, this is all over. None of it matters. We're moving in a different direction. And then to resuscitate both of them and Stellan Skarsgård's character here, even in those just brief moments, but a long sequence for Jane, obviously, it rang completely hollow, in a way that things haven't completely rang that hollow before. Even though I don't really like the Wanda angle, say in Doctor Strange, it didn't feel hollow. But the Jane thing, like, it just felt forced the entire time. Did it have a meaningful, like, emotional quota to you? Did you feel like it was paying off on something that you were waiting for? Or
so here's the thing. You said you cared about Jane and Thor 1. I did not. I'm literally talking a decade ago. Yeah.
Right? Like, over a decade ago now. Whenever it came out, I saw it in theaters. I loved it. Jane, I was convinced, was a real human character that he was in love with. And that was a great layer to his character. Well,
I saw that in like 2012, because I didn't see it in theaters, but it was the first Thor. Thor was the first Marvel movie I saw after I saw the Avengers, which was the first one that I'd ever seen. Yep, there you go. And one of my main complaints about Thor is the weight that they give the Thor and Jane romance, which just completely falls flat for me, because I couldn't buy Jane as a character, because I was like, you're just writing this person as a love interest, and like, she's doing her own plot things, but that's really only so you can be like, look, we have a well-written woman character who's a scientist and is smart and is a independent woman, whatever. I don't know. She was, I like, Natalie Portman's great. No shade to her. But I just didn't really buy that at all. And then in the Dark World, she was literally just a plot device, because she was infected with the ether, and they were like, oh, we have to save Jane. She didn't have anything to do on her own. So I understand why Natalie Portman did not want to come back for Ragnarok, also because she wanted Patty Jenkins to direct the Dark World. And then they said, no, we're going to go with Alan Taylor. And then it stunk. Might have stunk with Patty Jenkins too after Wonder Woman 1984. Who's to say? But so I think I'm on the flip side of you, where I felt like Jane was actually more of a real person in this one. Not to say that it was great, and I was like, yes, she's the best character, but it felt like she was doing things more on her own. Like, she actually had a legitimate arc in this, instead of her just doing things to help Thor. Because like, even in the first one, where she actually did things to advance the plot, as opposed to Thor the Dark World, where she did, again, nothing except poke something and then get infected. Like, it still doesn't really feel like she had any, like, she didn't change at all in Thor 1. It was just kind of the same static character. Whereas in this, I'm like, okay, I don't know. I felt she was more dynamic here. Not to say it was perfect. But I actually thought this was a step in the right direction for Jane. But
that's, I think, where I just completely disagree with this sentiment of bringing her in at all. Like, we should have just ended there, and like, you want to go after a love interest, like let's go after a new love interest and start a new arc, because I think that you even said this at the beginning of the conversation, nothing actually happened here. At the end of the film, Thor is exactly who he was kind of at the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
He's just got someone named Love
God.
to kill with, who's incidentally his real life daughter, which is fun for him, but it's really annoying and empty for me, because it's like this film went through all the logistics of bringing Jane back just to kill her.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah. No, I mean, I agree with that. Like
at some level, what did it actually accomplish?
Right.
Not just in the MCU, but as a film, what did it accomplish? It resuscitated previous entry's character that was written out and brought her back just so that she could die, and essentially deliver nothing besides allowing the casting of Chris Hemsworth's daughter in the film with him. That's it. It's the whole thing.
No, I agree with that. Like I think it was not I think, well, if part of the issue, I feel like, is that both Gore the God Butcher and, you know, Jane as Mighty Thor, where she has breast cancer, like those are very weighty things. And I think, you know, from my understanding of the comics, they're also treated pretty seriously in the comics. And Taika's sensibilities are kind of like, let's just, like, these are silly movies. Let's just, I don't care. Which is like, he can do dramedy very well. In the past, he's done that. But I think, I don't know, it kind of felt like he was just sleepwalking through this a bit and being like, let's just throw things at the wall and I'm going to have a good time and say, fuck it, who cares about all of these things? And so as a result, none of those more emotional beats really landed, because he didn't try to build up anything there. It was like, yeah, we'll bring her back. And again, I thought she was more of a character in this one than she was previously. But like you said, what impact did she really have? And then with Gore, like that, you know, same complaint that I was talking about earlier, like having someone be called the God Butcher and have him really hate the gods and really have that could be a really interesting way to make Thor question his authority and his role in the world. And I think that they don't do anything with that. It's nothing. I mean, it's just there. And it was like, you know, we're going to take these two really well-known comic moments and adapt them, but we're going to take away any of the
gravitas that they had.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know that this version of Thor would ever get me on board with the Jane breast cancer becoming Mighty Thor thing. Just this current canon, maybe like a deviant timeline or something, but I can't really buy into that. I could have bought into Gore very seriously, but I don't know what you think of this, and I'm probably just on an island alone, but at some point through these however many films there are, as we're traveling the multiverse and the cosmos, I'm a little bit tired of every main villain speaking the exact same language as our heroes. Like, at some level, I want them to speak a different language and read subtitles and have them feel like they are of a different culture. And that really showed up for me with Gore, where it's like this guy is living on a desert planet and his daughter died and he's speaking in English. Like, it doesn't really, none of the stuff that they're trying to set up really feels that way. And I don't have that complaint when we go to the God world and we watch Russell Crowe speak English, because Zeus is like a earth god. And we see those other gods in the council sitting around, each speaking in their own tongues. And it's stuff like that that's like a little bit Star Warsy, where I actually appreciate seeing the other culture of the galaxy or the multiverse, whatever it is at this point. And I really just am being driven, like, and I don't even know. I just can't take anything seriously at this point, because all of these monsters and villains that are coming from the far depths of the galaxies speak perfect English when they show up.
Well, I will tell you, at least in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, if you see when they're like getting processed through the prison in the first one, there's like I think there's at least one moment where it's like implants, universal translator. So the Guardians at least have an excuse. Yeah.
And I actually have other points I want to make about Ragnarok and Galaxy against like a film like this.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a complaint that has weighed heavily on my mind, but now that you bring it up, I'm like, that would be cool. I don't think it's I definitely don't I definitely am not as like I definitely haven't thought about it as much as you have. And I don't think my enjoyment will be ruined by everyone continuing to speak English. But sure, would be cool.
Earth's mightiest heroes speaking English. I can see that. Not all of them, because that just seems absurd. But I mean, largely I can see that. But like, I don't know, from the furthest, most distant galaxy and multiverse, I lose a little bit. Just lose it a little bit. Yeah, so the points that I was alluding to a moment ago about Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor Ragnarok, and why I really still like Thor Ragnarok, is it felt kind of punk rock. It felt very like teenage, like these aren't your parents' superheroes type of a thing. Like it was just very fun and spinning the MCU in a little bit of a more angsty direction. And Thor Ragnarok is like a complete stripping down, like Disneyfication of what I thought Taika style was. You know, depending on your sensibility, you do or don't like Jojo Rabbit, but at some level,
I like it.
Overwhelming joyfulness that he depicts Hitler with is absolutely hilarious and at a meta level, like just very delicious to someone with my sensibilities, knowing how angry it would make Hitler. To be depicted by Taika and all those different layers. And so there's a little bit of rebelliousness to most of the films from him that I really like. And I didn't get any of that sense here. And, you know, he actually wrote this film. And so I thought that there would be much more of that style present. Did you notice the difference in tonality, or did it bother you at all?
Yeah. Well, I think so, to use your word, I mean, Ragnarok did have that rebelliousness in it. And sometimes that kind of, not all the time, I mean, sometimes I think it did go too far, which I've talked about in my MCU retrospectives. If anyone wants to go on drinkingmovies.com/tag/Marvel-retrospective, it's on there. But like there's
or you could just search like whatever the name of the movie is.
Thor Ragnarok retrospective.
That'll pop it up.
Movies. Yeah, whatever.
Just Thor. Thor will pop it up.
So anyway, and I think a lot of Ragnarok was refreshing. Again, sometimes I think it went too far. Like sometimes I was like, the Thor in Ragnarok is a very different Thor than we had seen last. And I'm like, maybe that's a little too fast. I think Infinity War is the best Thor, because he's got the humor, but he's also got like the gravitas. But anyway, that's
Infinity War is the peak of the MCU. You're correct.
And I mean, except for Captain America: Winter Soldier. But anyway, and then like and in Ragnarok, like they killed off the Warriors 3, who were, if not big, at least somewhat important parts of the first two Thor movies. They were just like gone like in a snap.
You're talking about the superhero Shazam.
Yes.
You're talking about gosh, I don't know the other two. Ray Stevenson, right? Who we'll talk about next in RRR.
Yeah. Hogan, who's a character that existed.
I don't know who that is.
Yeah. I mean, again, they were not huge parts, but they were like,
I couldn't remember if they'd killed off Sif or not, but
no, because she was busy filming Blind Spot, so she couldn't do it.
That's what it's called. I was like, is it Blacklist that she was on? No, it's Blind Spot.
Anyway, they killed them like really fast, and basically Thor didn't give a shit about it. I was like, okay, whatever. But as a whole, I think the rebelliousness was very good for Thor and the MCU as a whole. And for Love and Thunder, I feel like that rebelliousness and the kind of, I'm going to turn everything on its head kind of attitude that Ragnarok had just turned into an I don't care attitude.
Exactly. Yeah, it was just, and it wasn't just that he didn't care. It was almost like all the Disney party lines were getting checked. Like, we want this for merchandise, and we want this, and we want this, and we want this. And, it does set up, like you mentioned, like the God Butcher. Like, how cool would it have been to see like 30 gods butchered in between each thing they're going to do to mark the passage of time? Or how about a cut to whatever the hell the Guardians of the Galaxy were doing to set up Guardians of the Galaxy 3, whoever they were fighting with their search call, right? Like, none of that gets wrapped up. And I know that they want to lead into other things, but when you introduce something within the film proper, especially like butchering gods or these distress calls, it would be interesting to have a sense of the world and how these characters are affecting it and what the outcomes of their choices are. And instead, we end up with things where we spend a bunch of time with Jane and ultimately nothing happens. She goes back to being dead to us just as she entered the film. I mean, arguably the most important thing that happens to the character is the action he takes with Russell Crowe throwing the lightning bolt, and then the end of the film, that cameo.
Yeah.
Which after I saw it, I almost sent you a GIF of him. And I was like, no, I don't want to ruin it.
Yes, I had no idea, because I mean, for Doctor Strange, like, I was spoiled on basically all of those, but I avoided going on the spoilers subreddits this time and everything, so I had no idea. Then Brett Goldstein appeared, and I was watching it with like a bunch of my friends who've also seen Ted Lasso, and we were all like, "Oh my god, like Roy Kent!" So thrilled for him. Also, I just want to throw out there, I don't know what the hell Russell Crowe is doing, but I have to say I really liked it. With his little silly little accent, I was like, this is great.
He was doing an impression of how Jared Leto would play that role.
Oh my
and
God.
It was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. I understand people not liking it, but
it was great. And
you kind of have to revel in the absurdism of it, because like Zeus is supposed to be a douche, especially in the MCU. And so in the comics that I've read that a long time ago that had him, he was definitely not a cool god. And so playing him as that douchey guy that thinks that he's super important, that just wants to have orgies all the time, is awesome. A very funny way of doing it. I could just see him saying more olives, please, between every line. Also,
so I was reading, so Lena Headey was supposed to be, I think, in the Pantheon. Yeah, she got paid $7 million for a appearance that was then cut from the movie.
That's the Game of Thrones lady,
yeah,
Cersei, right?
Yeah.
What was she supposed to be?
Couldn't tell you. I don't know. Some god.
She made $7 million though. Cool.
Yeah. And then they cut her, and there's some drama going on with it, which is why I know about this. Anyway, it doesn't matter. There's some. I know what you're talking about. She's being sued by old agents for something that they didn't help negotiate. Yeah. Well, anyway, but also Simon Russell Beale had like one line in that, and I was like, I know that voice, and it was Simon Russell Beale, and he appeared, and that was it. And I was really bummed, and they should have used him more. But I was like, look at that, the best actor, one of the best living actors, is in a MCU film. Wasn't in it that much, but.
What did you think of the what is it, the undershadow, the darkness, whatever it is that Christian Bale summons with his sword when he stabs the ground? How did you feel about the way that was pulled off?
Well, I think the fact that I can barely even remember any of this is pretty indicative of.
Really? You don't remember him like assaulting an entire town?
No, I remember that, but I'm like, could I tell you a single distinctive visual thing about that? No.
Oh, that's my primary point. Yeah. Is which I do. I can see the aesthetic choice to make it almost indiscernible and just darkness, but it's, from what I could see on the screen, there was excellent creature design. I know that people are very so on the film that I previously mentioned, Zachary Levi starring in Shazam, but the creature design in that film was just amazing. It was really, really cool to see the way that they did it. And it seemed like the creatures that they designed for the Shadow Realm were very intricate and detailed, but you couldn't actually see them because of the layering of darkness. And even when we go to the end of the film, or near the end of the film on that comet, and he summons them, you can barely see them, and you can only see them when there's the close-up, slow-down sequences of Tessa Thompson like stabbing it with lightning or whatever. But because of the stylized way that they depict those scenes, you really can't even get a sense of it. So I was kind of, other than all the other CG complaints, I thought that was a really poor choice to make it so that your rendered characters couldn't even be seen and appreciated in a film like this. I mean, think about Doctor Strange and how cool some of those monsters were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say Doctor Strange, I know I've been complaining about the quality of the visual effects in Marvel, but I feel like Doctor Strange, by and large, had some banging images in there.
It did. It also had that stupid tome scene that looked really bad to me, at least.
Yeah, whatever.
But then it had the awesome skeleton sequences.
The zombie cape, yeah.
Yeah.
That washed away all of my other complaints. I was like, cool. This one did not have a thing where I was like, oh, this is great. Like, this looks so much better that I've forgotten about everything else. Like, I thought when they were fighting Christian Bale and it was black and white, and there was like the only color came from the weapons illuminating people, I was like, that's pretty cool. And I thought the scene when Gore was about to go ask Eternity for his favor and everything, and they were kind of in that, I don't know, liminal space thing that kind of looks like the Soul Stone area from Infinity War as a visual reference.
Yeah, like an in-between dimension thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that looked pretty good, honestly. But I think because I believe a lot of this was shot on the volume, like the big LED screen from The Mandalorian. And it's been interesting because I think recently I feel like we've been seeing the limits of that.
That makes sense because the cinematographer of The Mandalorian is the cinematographer of this film. I think it's his first film that he shot.
Oh, cool. Good for him. But I think the volume works very well in The Mandalorian, and I think it worked really well in The Batman. And then because it was also used extensively there, but then in like for Thor, Love and Thunder, and then also in Obi-Wan Kenobi, which recently wrapped up. I think those really they did not look great. So I don't know much about the volume and how it's used, but I just think it's very interesting how it can get such different results for these different things.
Aesthetic choices.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one thing that I've heard a lot about, especially on Letterboxd in my comment section, is people telling me about how much the color spoke to them. As someone who can't see it, could you maybe outlay to me and just more broadly why the usage of color here is so important to the film?
Is it important? No. Does it look cool? Yeah.
Okay.
Are you talking about like the black and white thing that I was when they were fighting Christian Bale, or just in general?
Just in general. I can't see color.
Yeah.
So I've heard that not just there, but that throughout the film that it is richly saturated, I guess.
Yeah. So it is, but there's no like depth to anything.
Okay. That came through on the CG complaints that I had. Okay.
And so, I mean, I am all for Marvel movies having more color in them. I think that's needed. But it felt, a lot of this felt very flat. And I think a lot of that was just like poor CGI. Like I think of,
like the depth of field was just bad.
Yeah. And I know there's like a screenshot that's been floating around a lot on Twitter, at least in my Twitter circles, of when Thor is gifted the goats, right? So it's like people tugging at the goats, and all the
Tooth
people
Grinder
are
and Tooth Gnasher.
Yes. And all of the people are like the aliens that are doing that are like blue and purple. And then behind them is also very bright colors, but it looks incredibly flat and lifeless. So it is
like there's
colorful.
no rendered space between them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's very
everything felt
colorful,
like
but-
two-dimensional in the
Mhm.
backgrounds.
Mhm.
And I've been watching a lot of like 1950s films the last 2 weeks, and what they can achieve with just a painting and its depth of field
Yeah.
compared to Thor, just anecdotally off of what I was watching, I was like, holy shit, this looks bad.
Yeah. And again, that's something that also is very frustrating because it's like, on the one hand, more color, fantastic. On the other, that's not enough to make it visually interesting and engaging. And it kind of seems like we've reached the point where it's just like, oh, a bunch of colors equals good cinematography. And you're like, no.
Am I wrong, or did Ragnarok kind of experiment with all these different colors as well? Because
Yeah.
to my eye, it aesthetically looked a lot better. I don't think that it really had great cinematography. I don't think Taika's really a great cinematographer outside of a handful of scenes in Jojo Rabbit that I can think of. There's just really not great scenes that he's shot, but he does have some really compelling, very fun action cinematography, like the Hulk Thor fight sequences and how he'd move the camera from one of those characters fighting to the other. And I noticed that was very absent for me here. You mentioned the stylized thing where the weapons are glowing on the planet, and that just did not look half as good as those Wonder Woman opening sequences do to me. I don't even know what the proper way of saying those introductory animated sequences are for the Wonder Woman films, but they're really gorgeous to look at, and it just didn't touch that.
Yeah. To answer your question though, yeah, Ragnarok was also part of the reason Ragnarok was so fun. It was like, oh, look, there's actually color in this movie, because I think Thor 1 actually looks very good. I will defend Thor 1 until the day I die. But
Branagh did a great job. Yeah. It looks very good.
People are so mean about it, and I'm like, no, Thor 1 is great. But The Dark World is like just a slog
I remember
to
it
look
fondly.
at.
I haven't seen it in a decade.
Yeah.
Thor: The Dark World is the best film in the MCU. Continue.
Yep. That's exactly what I said. So anyway, so after The Dark World, to have Ragnarok come in and be this literal splash of color was like very refreshing. And now, I mean, like I said earlier, it's the same thing, but without any care. It's just kind of like, oh, this looks cool. Let's see what happens if I do this. And it's just like, I don't know. I don't want to be making assumptions or judgments about people's lives, obviously, but part of me is like, Taika, you should just go back to New Zealand and maybe cool off, maybe stop, take your thumb out of your ass a bit, and
I don't know if he can back it down from his elbow that far.
And go back to your roots and maybe stay a little humble. I don't know. It just feels like
this is a kind of a case of success, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like, it very much feels like he was in the hallway between his reservation dogs and what's the boat one?
The boat one.
Yeah, he has another TV show that he runs on HBO.
Our Flag Means Death. Yeah,
Our Flag Means Death. Right. So he's like in the hallway between these two writers' rooms, and he's like, I got things that won't work in either show. Let's toss him in the Marvel movie. Like he's so busy that it really feels like he did not put the attention and care that he normally does into his films, like Hunt for the Wilder People or Jojo Rabbit, or even Ragnarok, where he actually had a depth of field and was very excited to like get these action pieces.
Yeah. Also, I will say, unrelated, I think the absence of Loki was very felt in this. I'm just going to put it out there. He's the best.
When his face showed up in the jokey retelling from Gorm or whatever, it was like, oh yeah,
Korg.
Yeah, there we go.
It's like, oh, it's the best Marvel character. Oh, he's not in this though.
I definitely missed him. I don't know that he's the best, but I definitely missed him.
Also, sorry, just to recap though, the Korg thing where he was literally giving a recap at the beginning of the movie to catch everyone up to speed. It was the same thing. It treated everything so flippantly.
Yes, reductive.
Yeah, and they're like, I think that can be fine. I think it's good not to necessarily treat everything that came before in the MCU as like holy and untouchable, because there have been bad stuff that came out of the MCU. But there's also, I don't know, there is a balance where you don't just say, like, who cares? I don't know. Like, you don't have to completely throw everything out of the window. I mean, again, it was like a funny, like they played off the deaths of all of these people as funny. And I was like, I don't know, you're trying to establish that your character is like depressed and is pushing people away because he's so scared of losing people again. And you're couching it all as like haha joke funny. And so then that, that came back to bite the movie in the ass, because when he's like, oh, I think I'd rather have someone and lose someone than not have anyone at all. That's like, okay, it doesn't land. It just doesn't work because everything's a joke. And it
absolutely right. But the one thing that I will say is that there are some jokes and some layers of comedy here that I actually did enjoy, which is why I didn't have too big of a problem sitting through the movie. But I can't remember the name of the god who gets his head cut off now in the Eddas, but I think that it's even depicted in the most recent God of War game. Having Korg's like mask not be tied to Valkyrie's belt or Thor's belt so that he could just flippantly chime in as they're doing these like crazy demon battles seems like a huge oversight, because you're trying to make it silly and then you're removing Taika's voice of the silliness, which I think would have actually made it like more enjoyable to hear him chiming in throughout. And all it would have taken is, a rope through his eye socket and then tying him to a belt, and then he could just chime in the whole time, which would have been funny.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, like I feel like I've been really harsh on this movie. I was like, I don't know, I smiled sometimes in the theater. It was fine. I honestly didn't hate the goats either. I laughed at that, even though I know a lot of people were like, that's from 2014. Like, that's such an old joke, the screaming goats. But I was like, I don't know. I giggled. But then again,
I did like the first three times, but then it like kept going, and I was like, all right, maybe like a different way of introducing the screaming goats.
I will say the biggest like what the fuck moment for me though is the extreme prevalence of child soldiers in this movie, played off for laughs. That
you're not a fan? You're supposed to watch this on your rechargeable laptop and or phone in 6 months, which is, built on cobalt, which is farmed from child slaves. And so you're supposed to just get normalized to child slaves and child soldiers.
Well, I mean, you may be right, but when I see them in front of me, as opposed to just twiddling around on my phone, it was weird. I don't know, especially like, again, coming from the guy who made Jojo Rabbit, I was like, what's happening?
What are you saying? Yeah,
Me?
because what is he saying? He wrote it. It's like, what are you saying with your words here, dude? Like,
right. And it was, I mean, and also the fact that Thor, at the very end of the movie, when he goes to rescue the kids that Gore took, including the kid that they made Heimdall's son, because they were like, shit, we need a guy who could have Heimdall's powers, but we killed him off. So he has a son now. Whoa. Oh man, that was pulled that one out of their asses. But
right, and that's why to me that thing I was saying about like the Disney party line, like we've been hearing a lot about seeing yourself depicted on screen. Well, now Disney's like, oh, we're just going to put children soldiers on screen after they're imprisoned, as so that they have no choice but to fight.
Yeah.
Like, what are you really doing? And it's like, I know that Taika wrote it and that other gal wrote it, but like, it just feels like this is Disney's objective from a top-down perspective. And I just really find it detestable, personally.
Like saying they're having the kids fight so the kids watching it can be like, oh, look.
Yes.
I could also,
yeah. And the narrative of Hemsworth's daughter that she has.
Yeah.
Where it's like, your dad died to save you after making a bunch of bad choices. So now the guy that talked him out of killing all the gods, who is also a god, is going to raise you to kill people.
Yeah.
Instead of gods.
It was fucking weird. Also, sidebar, when Chris Hemsworth or Thor was like, no, you shouldn't kill the gods, he did not, I don't think he gave a single reason not to. There was no interrogation of what
No.
any of this actually
There's no
means,
philosophy. Yeah.
right? And like, again, that's a very interesting thread that you could pull on, and it's specifically for Thor, who is himself a god and has throughout the movies struggled with his power. And I mean, I've complained before about his arc is just like, I'm worthy to be king now. I don't want to be king. I do want to be king now. I'm not going to be king now. I'm going to hand over my kingdom to a functioning alcoholic. Whatever. That's a whole nother issue. Again, I touch on it in my Thor Ragnarok retrospective.
Which you can read by typing in Thor Ragnarok at Drinking the Movies.
But God, where was I going with this? I just started complaining. Yeah, I've forgotten where I was going with that.
It's an initial complaint that you had from previous films.
Because there's like, anyway, so the idea of having this guy go around and kill gods should be very interesting when your main character is a guy who's struggled with his responsibilities for all of the movies, even if his struggles don't always make sense because they just change at the writer's whim all the time.
And now he wants to be a dad to a child soldier.
Yeah, right?
Yay.
Yeah, they're like, okay, in a montage about Thor and Jane's relationship, we're going to show one child, and this will be enough to signify that Thor wants to be a dad.
No. You forget about the ridiculous time that he's walking on the sidewalk and he looks through the window at a stroller longingly. You're forgetting about that deep story plot point.
Yeah, okay. My bad. That's on me. Like that was just so weird. And also I'm like, okay, what are they going to do in the future? Because they're not going to put another, I don't think they're
child soldiers. They're going to use America
sorry.
Chavez. They're going to use Love. They're going to use Haley Steinfeld's not a child. We need more children to commit war for
crimes?
Disney.
Okay. Yeah, totally. Sign me up. But it's just, that was such a baffling part of the movie that like at that point I'd been coasting along of being like, okay, this is entertaining enough. And I'd been admiring the arms of everyone involved because they all looked jacked as hell. I was like, good for y'all. And then I got to that point where Thor gives the children his powers briefly. And I'm like, okay,
why did you never do this before?
Yeah,
like for all of Wakanda, maybe.
Right.
Do you think that could have like won the war like instantly, maybe in Infinity War? At least against everyone but Thanos? Probably.
Yeah. So why didn't you do that earlier on adults? And B, what's happening? It just took me out of it so much, especially because it was like, haha, joke. Here's a kid like killing people with her stuffed bunny as a joke. I was like, it was just so baffling. Like I can't even have a response to it.
In a different genre, like a proper horror genre, like where a child is like killing like monsters with her bunny, like I get it, but within the context of like everything that the film is doing and Disney at large, it just really feels weird. The one thing that I will say had the most interesting, well-developed and well-told relationship throughout the runtime of the film is Thor's relationship to Stormbreaker. I was very surprised that the most significant relationship arc in the film was between the god and his weapon.
Yeah. What a complimentary thing to say, huh?
Yes.
I just
not insultory at all.
I mean, listen, the mere existence of Stormbreaker is kind of this goes back to my point. Thor just like ping pongs all around in each movie because at the end of Ragnarok, he was like, I have accepted my power. I don't need a hammer. And then in Infinity War, he's like, I have to go on a side quest to make a weapon. And then this one, he's like, I don't know. And then,
at the end of Ragnarok, he plants it, right? And you're like, why did he plant it? Or was it Guardians of the Galaxy? I don't remember. Well, he plants Stormbreaker, remember? This
is at the beginning of this movie.
No, he planted Stormbreaker in a different film.
Comment.
Yeah, with Groot.
What?
He definitely did.
No, Groot made the handle in Infinity War.
And then he stabbed it into the ground in a different film. I'm like super sure that I saw that before, didn't I?
You saw it in the trailer for Thor: Love and Thunder.
I don't know. All right. Well, I'll leave that to you to get back to me.
Okay. Okay.
Was there any other points about Thor you wanted to make, or should we get on to Triple R?
Gosh. It's just I'm very frustrated because phase 4 so far has really felt it's not serving.
Not very good.
Yeah. And like, I mean, I like Shang-Chi, I like Spider-Man. I liked parts of some of the shows, but I think
I liked Doctor Strange.
Yeah, I did like Doctor Strange. I mean, I still had a lot of issues with it, but overall, yeah. And I mean, I've liked parts of almost everything. But as a whole, it feels like they're doing way too much and
simultaneously doing nothing.
Yeah, yes. And the quality is suffering. I don't know. Like I think back to like even phase 1 when they were just figuring things out, it just felt like everything had so much higher stakes that they really cared a lot more. And now it's kind of like, who cares? We're going to make a buttload of money anyway. So we're not actually going to put in effort. And it's really frustrating because I'm like, listen, I'm a big fan of you, obviously. And I've spent a lot of time writing and talking about the MCU. And it's getting like harder and harder to
forgive you.
Really support that. Thank you. That I appreciate that. And I
I was saying that it's hard for you to forgive them for their missteps.
Yes. So I just want to grab Kevin Feige by his stupid little baseball cap and be like, stop it. I could fix this. Let me fix it. Whatever.
I think that, to me, just at a broad point, they've never been less self-contained than they are now. Like, when I go into a Marvel movie, I don't really actually care about the movie anymore because I know that the movie is not just about itself. It's about everything else. And back when it was first beginning, and I think for quite a while through the 2010s, you'd go into a Marvel film and you'd be like, what's going to happen? And you'd feel like anything could happen. But now you feel like you're just getting the cliff notes in each movie to whatever the next major thing is. Yeah. And so I think that's my towering complaint.
I feel like this movie was not nearly as egregious about that. I mean, except for like the post-credit scenes, but that's like their entire purpose is to tease. But like the movie itself, I felt like was pretty.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel self-contained because it's bringing in characters from the other films that end up having nothing to do with the outcome of the character. I just don't buy into Thor actually being affected by Jane. That's just my own distance from the character at this point. And I think I read sequences like the God area in the middle of the film as setting up the rest of the MCU and the next Thor, whereas maybe you read it more within context of the film. But there's just multiple sequences, like maybe introducing the technology of Stormbreaker being a Bifrost traveling device in that manner of like allowing a ship to be led seemed like something that was convenient and probably going to come back in the future. Just stuff like that I didn't really read as self-contained.
I mean, the thing is, I don't think Marvel generally, I don't think Marvel plans as much as people think they do. And it's just like, they'll put this thing out there. And then if they need to in the future, they'll look back at this movie and say, okay, we need this like to travel from the Bifrost. We're going to use this thing now because Love and Thunder said it, but I don't necessarily view it as a specific setup for the next instance where they need to travel by Bifrost. But, you know, that's just me.
Yes. All right. Well, if nothing else, let's get on to Triple R.
Brace yourself for wrong. Brace yourself for
Kim! ఈ నక్కల వేట ఎంతసేపు కుంభస్థలాన్ని బద్దల కొడదాం పదా
All right, Anna. This is one of my first, what is it?
Tollywood?
Tollywood? Telugu
Yeah.
is the language though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is one of my first Tollywood movies, if not the first one ever. What did you think of this film?
I mean, like, listen, I had a blast. This is like, well, the Marvel movies, some of them I have a blast in, but at this point I just get so like into the dirt about like the details and everything. I'm like, well, this is annoying because the character arcs and everything. And this was like, there's no baggage about anything. It was just like here to have a good time and have some great dancing sequences. And I was vibing. I had a great time. I was really mad. Because I watched it on my TV at home, and I know I had tried to see it in theaters when it came out. And I just like couldn't make the times line up. But I know I would have had even an even better time in the theater. But I still had a pretty good time on my couch alone in my apartment.
That's a ringing endorsement. I think that I had less of a enraptured time than you. I really was taken and kind of surprised by much of the stylings. I appreciate a lot of what it did. I don't think that I read it quite as favorably as you, or maybe I'm just less forgiving of things like CGI and the technical hangups that I have, which at some level you have to acknowledge the budget of the film.
Right.
But I do have certain things that I always look for, like the quality of fire and CGI, which was not very high here. But it is, as you said, very fun, filled with dancing and busy. And I did appreciate that about it. I also, I don't know that I like, but I, at some level, respect the revisionist history narrative of the film. I don't think that I read the characters the way that everyone else does. I think that there's a little bit more happening under the surface of the film that is questionable about what exactly it's saying, like we were just talking about with Thor. But I don't have a complete understanding of the history of that area, so I can't really assuredly make those sentiments here. But it's loud, it's bright, it's bombastic, and there's more than one tiger scene. So at some level, how could you go wrong?
Yeah, I definitely think like I didn't have as much of an issue with the visual effects in RRR as opposed to Thor, because I mean, Thor had a much bigger budget. And
like
B,
80 times probably bigger.
I think Thor's like 200 million and this was like what, 70 million?
Was it that much money?
It was that much. It was because it was the most expensive Tollywood film made, I believe.
I wonder what the movie's budget is without marketing.
Okay, it was made on a budget of $72 million. It is the most expensive Indian film to date.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I am much less forgiving of it then. I thought that it was made for a lot less money. I'm more forgiving because it was less expensive than Thor, even if it was not cheap. And B, it felt like there was like a playfulness about the whole thing that Absolutely.
I was like, it didn't need to have perfect visual effects because it wasn't trying
playful, to necessarily be that. Yeah. I was thinking it's maximalist absurdism. Like every layer of the film is just wrinkled with absurdity.
Yes.
From the saving of the child when they do that hanging feet on the bridge and they wet the flag and wrap it around him. Yeah. Like it's just, and it's not just absurd. It's like the most amount of absurdity you can get while still having forward momentum.
Yeah.
I mean, God, I think my favorite kill is he shoots the guy, but the arrow stops in the tree, and then he runs up and he kicks the arrow into the guy's head after it narrowly misses his eye. And it's not good CGI, but it's just very satisfyingly stupid.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't have nearly like the same gripes that I do about Thor's visuals with this one, because I was like, yeah, movie is setting out to have a good time, and I'm having a good time. But like, I mean, like you said,
and to celebrate facial hair. It's really at its core, it's a celebration of facial hair.
And like you said, I mean, I cannot talk at all about the historical events behind this movie. Like I did some Wikipedia-ing after I watched this, but I could not call myself an expert by any means. So this was, I wasn't really looking at this for any historical accuracy or anything. I was like, this is
I guess
rollicking good time.
Before we continue,
I know it's an alternate history, so it's not like accurate, but even.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is before we continue, we should probably outline what the film is.
Right.
RRR is oh boy, what's the terminology for it again? Rise, revolt, and
resist. Is there a resist in there?
That sounds right. So it's some of those words, and it's 100% accurate retelling visually of the history of two celebrated revolutionaries in the 1920s of their home country, which is like an undefined India, Pakistan, maybe more. I couldn't really determine if there was other countries that were being wrapped into this. But I did get the sentiment that there might be other nations or island nations being wrapped into this. But it, in fact, is not historically accurate. It is an enormous fiction of these two friends from two different faiths and two different homes coming together to resist the empire, which is...
Aren't they... Wait, because Beam was not actually a Muslim, right? So aren't they actually both... That was a line. He said, I'm not actually Muslim. So aren't they both...
did Raju say that he was not Muslim? I thought that he was depicting like a Pakistani character. So Beam is the fellow that has a full beard like the entirety of the film. And he never said that he was Muslim, but the other character, Raju, is that right?
Yeah.
Who had a mustache and was like the greatest warrior ever during the police station scene. He said that he was Muslim.
Okay, I didn't catch that.
And that happened when he showed up in his police officer uniform. Do you remember that like confrontation scene? And so I don't know that I'm correct. I don't know that my reading's correct. I don't know that the translated version we got on Netflix is even correct. But my reading was that it was kind of like a marriage of these two places of Pakistan and of India. But I might be wrong. But that's just the way that I had read it.
You might be wrong, but you might be right. I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Yes. So anyways, Ray Stevenson is at the center of our film as the evil Scott Buxton.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a tremendous rifle with a glorious scope on it and an evil wife who I do not know the name of. And they kidnap a child. Catherine. And they kidnap a child, and that kind of is the...
Oh, sorry. They pay for it, actually. They throw some money at the mother, and they're like, we're going to take your child. So it was totally fine. It was totally fine.
That is one reading of the film.
Mm-hmm.
The other is that the daughter had decorated her hand and that they were paying for that. And then they just took the child without any negotiation at all. And so I would call that kidnapping.
I would also agree. It was a little, I don't think it was voluntary.
Yeah. And so the rest of the film is the pursuit of getting her back by Beam, who encounters Raju, who is one of the greatest warriors of all time, and can fight roughly 20,000 men in single hand-to-hand combat and win easily.
Yes.
And yeah, that's pretty much the film. So building off of what we've said before, what do you think? Do you have favorite scenes? Do you have things you want to call out? What do you think of Tollywood? There's all sorts of angles to go with here.
Yeah. Well, I will say that the version on Netflix is in Hindi, I tried to find the original Telugu version, which I know is the one that was in theaters.
Yeah, I think it's streaming on a service, but it's
it
like
was streaming
really
on
hard to get to.
Yeah,
it's
it was streaming on
or
a
something.
it's like a service that's like mostly Indian content, and it was like, and I tried to find a free trial and I couldn't, so I was like, well, I'll go and I'll listen to the Hindi version. But I did want to call out my two favorite scenes. One would be the ending of Act 1 when they go and they Beam has this truck full of like wild animals and they charge into the governor's mansion, and then he leaps off this truck with his like guns and weapons and everything, and all these tigers and everything just leap out behind him.
So that's you're bringing up
shit.
something that is one of my favorite like things that happens in this film, which is we go do things and we have no idea what they have anything to do with. Like he's getting a wolf to chase him early in the film. We're like, I don't know who this guy is. I don't know why this is happening.
Yeah.
And then
great
the wolf
introduction also
gets his ass kicked by a tiger, and then Beam's chased by a tiger. They kidnap the tiger, and we just go to a different scene, and like we don't have time to go, what was that all about? Like, why did we just watch that scene? And then that same thing happens with a young boy who's like, oh yeah, I can shoot things from 20,000 miles away under the sea and hit him square in the eye. So the way that those payoffs happen, I really love. But continue with the siege on the palace.
Oh no, I just want to say that was I think I was sitting on my couch and I think I like squealed with joy because I was like, this is so cool. Like just absolutely absurd and absolutely magnificent. And then like the tigers go around like chomping on the British officers there, and like there's some deer that like impale people on their horns.
Oh yeah, there was a
like,
horn used in the main fight against Stevenson, right? Or no, it was the bad guy that had the key that he slams his arm down on and then gets it. And then there's another scene where Beam, a leopard casually gives him a hug with its claws, and he rips it from his back and he throws it as a soldier. And I was like, that's one thing Marvel doesn't have.
I know.
It's heroes wielding wild cats.
They simply do not have the balls to do that. And they should. It would be much better. But I thought that scene, I was just like having a blast in that scene. And then also the second scene that I want to call out is the the big dance sequence.
Which one? There's two.
Like the first one, like at the
one in the film.
wedding. Yes, right. The one that's not the credits stuff.
Which was amazing. One of the best credit sequences this year, if not the best.
When Beam has been invited by what's her face, the British chick.
Cassandra, maybe?
I can tell you. No, Jenny. Who apparently, according to Wikipedia, that was originally supposed to be Daisy Edgar Jones. Fun fact. Yeah. Anyway, and then people are ragging on him and Raju for not knowing like the, stuffy, crusty British dances. And then they whip out this huge, extremely like exuberant dance number and dance the socks off all the British people. And it was so great. It was just no notes, perfect movie. And it was again like just absurd, fun, really just like balls to the walls there. And it was great because sorry not to loop back to Marvel again and again, but I feel like another thing is Marvel has just gotten really like self-conscious about what they're doing and like self-reflexive and too meta about it. And they're like embarrassed kind of in a lot of ways by what they put out. Whereas this movie is just like, yeah, this is exactly what we're doing. And we're going to do it at 110%. And it's so earnest in how over the top it is that it just makes it so much more interesting to watch and fun. Like
it is
great.
Loud, and it is unashamed and unabashed in how it is going about things. Not to get too philosophical with it, but I will say that just seeing the reaction of so many people in America loving it, and just like if you were to philosophically observe the film for like what is its core theme, it's like the most Second Amendment pro movie I've seen probably in my life. It's like, what is the purpose of everyone's lives? It is to sacrifice for your people to go get arms from the imperialists so that you can bear arms against any oppressor that comes your way, and the like consequences of you not having those weapons to begin with. And I just thought that was like a really interesting philosophical like theme that it has under it, about maybe contemporary Indian politics or however you want to read that. And then just how much North American audiences have been and global audiences have been flocking to it. I think it's a very interesting like theme that people seem to not have any issue with, and are simultaneously loving the film. I won't get too political. I just think it's a very interesting note about how the film plays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really thought about it that way, but like once you pointed it out,
that's that's the whole
Roger's,
climax.
I mean, literally, Roger's entire thing is like, I have to give the weapons to the people so they can.
And Beam's entire thing is like, that's the most important, greatest idea I've ever heard in my whole life. I'm willing to die to do that with you.
Yes, and also because like the in Scrubs, the Guy Love song that was just. The Turk and JD sing like that guy. It's Guy Love. It's love between two guys.
Yes, I haven't seen that in a long time, but I loosely
that's the vibe.
It. Yes,
that was the vibe throughout.
It's
the movie.
Definitely
Guy Love.
Definitely a dude love vibe.
It was very much like a the phrase like dudes rock. It's a dudes rock movie.
Yeah. It is a dudes rock movie thesis, and I think it proved its point. I think that the choreography, not just of the dancing, which as you called out is great, but of all the action sequences is actually really well pulled off. I know that it's all preposterous, but I was just very impressed by the physical feats that these guys are achieving with their heads in frame, right? This is stuff that if Marvel did anything like this, the back of the head is to the camera. It's a stunt person, but these guys are pretty much in it to win it, and just about every scene. And I really respected and liked that. And it's probably the best choreography that I've encountered this year. As I mentioned, not just dance, but action choreography, which I'll have to remember at the end of the year, because this will probably get my vote for best action choreography.
As it should, probably.
The primary complaint that I have, I will hold off on. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, speaking of action choreography, I was thinking, like, when I was watching it, the second act, I was like, oh, this isn't as interesting. Because it was more talking and less people like fighting each other.
Too many guns.
So I was like, whatever, this is like less cool. And then the third act happened, and they go around and Barachu's on Beam's shoulders the entire time, like, and has these two massive rifles, and they're just like,
they do a full-on Voltron.
And I was like, never mind, all of my complaints have vanished. This is once again a perfect movie, and it has done nothing wrong ever.
There's a sequence in particular where Beam is running with Raju on his shoulders, and he's just reloaded, and then there's like two guys at his arms level, and he like grabs them and punches them and like runs one through a stone wall while Raju's shooting people above him. And it's just like one of the best pieces of cinema, like in a single scene that you could imagine. Like, it's just pure glory and victory to the heroes.
Yes, absolutely. What were you going to say about your complaints about this perfect movie?
So my main complaint, and I think that it takes the cake over all the other stuff, and it might just be part of the Tollywood style, is just tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of cut edits where you're just jumping frame, jumping frame, jumping frame, jumping frame. And whenever they hold the frame, like those dance sequences or in the action choreography, like the large fights that Raju was in at that police station outpost, those are like my favorite scenes. And whenever they're doing that constant quick cut, that's where it kind of loses me, right? Like the moment of him throwing the leopard at the bad guy is awesome, but that whole sequence is just so cut heavy that it kind of bummed me out and pulled me out of it. And so that I think is my primary complaint. But I I don't know enough about Tollywood to know if that's just part of the mode that they kind of
par for the
work
course.
in. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's kind of like watching 1950s American films. Like you just know what you're getting. You're either getting a drama or a Western almost
Right.
unanimously. And so I don't know if that's just how they work or if that's something more specific, but it was a very controlled film, which I was surprised by. It's enormity and absurdity, but it's still really, really controlled, and it tells its specific narrative in a very deft through line that other films with much less going on cannot achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really, watching something like that just makes other popular American films, not to name any names, just seem like where's the life?
Where's the joy? Where's the sincerity, the earnestness, the willingness to swing big? And that's why you gotta support films like Elvis.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I did support Elvis, and my parents supported it, which I was shocked by.
Fantastic.
It seems like
did your parents like Elvis?
Yes. And I was very
Good.
shocked because I thought not to start talking about Elvis, but I thought my dad would be thrown by having my dad, born in 1940, would be thrown by having Elvis walking around Beale Street while like Doja Cat is blasting. Not that he even knows who Doja Cat is, but no, both of them.
I was
really
so
liked
satisfied by that scene. Thank you for reminding me
it
of
rocked.
And that's a natural segue from Triple R to Elvis. So within the Tollywood genre, have you had any Bollywood exposure before?
Nope. I think the only I believe like the only Indian films I've seen are the first movie of the Apu trilogy, Pather Panchali. I think that's really one of the only Indian films I've seen. And honestly, I'm going to tell you, that was a screening for class, and it was at 4 p.m. and I was exhausted, and I did fall asleep for the last. I did fall asleep for the last like 20-30 minutes. So I haven't even seen that in its entirety, which is very bad of me, but
we all have our restrictions. I have my own. It is very difficult to pay the proper amount of attention to films and to like build, your day into a schedule where you can really dedicate your attention to them properly. I also have just massive glaring blind spots, so I can't really infer the differences here between like a Bollywood film and a Tollywood film. And I was hoping that maybe you could tell me a little bit about it. I've seen things like Last Film Show, but that's not really Bollywood, right? That's more of a riff on
I forgot I saw that too.
Film. There's a film like Fire in the Mountains, which is more of a documentary. And then there's like American films like Hotel Mumbai that I've seen, which are, just like American action films, or it's an American action film essentially just in India. So, unfortunately, I don't feel like I can really make a large comparison to Bollywood, but this film does make me more interested in both.
Yes, absolutely.
Those types of films. I think I saw a film called Razi a few years ago that had kind of soured my taste for Indian cinema. I think it was like an India-Pakistani film, and it was like, it felt like it was 3 hours long. It was probably 2.5.
Oh my God.
And, you look at these Tollywood and Bollywood films, and they all have these enormous runtimes. And I think that films like Triple R that are just relentlessly fun make it a lot easier for me to spend that much time within them. And there's other things that are more self-serious that are very draining to watch. So that's a long way of saying I need to watch more and what I'll intend to watch.
Yeah, no, this definitely made me want to check out some Tollywood films, because if they're anything like this,
specifically from this director, right?
Yes, absolutely. Like, this guy, he rocks. I don't know anything about him. He might be a terrible person, but from this alone, he rocks.
I know 2 things about him. He makes a very exciting movie, and he appears to love porn stashes. That is the 2 things that I have figured out about SS Rajamouli.
What more do you need to know?
Well, RRR does stand for Rise, Roar, Revolt.
Okay.
And with that, Anna, I think we'll get on to our final film of the day, Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy from Ryosuke Hamaguchi.
俺たちの体の相性唯一無二じゃん。
多分人違いじゃないかと。
そんなのあるわけない。好きな人を傷つけることしかできない。
何にでも慣れたはずだったのに、気がつけば時間だけが経ってしまった。
All right, Anna, you finished watching this film today.
I did.
What is your initial impression of this triptych love affair type of a film of desire and deceit and love?
Mm-hmm. So I think it was a very competently made, very well made movie. I don't know if I was super emotionally invested in any of what was going on. Not to say that I was disinterested, like I was still engaged, but it was more of like a clinical interest and like, I don't know, I wasn't really sure.
An appreciation, not an investment.
Yes, exactly. Which honestly, so the only other Hamaguchi film that I've seen is Drive My Car. And that is also how I felt for a lot of Drive My Car. There were a few, I know.
That was the best movie last year. What are you doing with yourself?
There were like two scenes. It was the scene between the younger guy and the main guy whose names I have now forgotten in the car. And then the final scene where they're doing the Chekhov play. And I was like, that's incredible. And that was really moving. And then for the rest of the runtime, I was kind of like, this is very well made. I'm not super emotionally into it. Those two scenes were like absolutely stellar though. I was like, if the rest of the movie could have been in my opinion, obviously, as good as those scenes would have been, like absolute top tier. But
sucks to be you because it was.
Okay,
for me.
Well, and I'm happy for you. I wish I had liked it more, but I mean, I still liked it. Whatever. That's a whole different conversation. But anyway, so I felt a lot of that same feeling for Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, except minus those standout scenes that really made me be like, wow, this is incredible. At least these two scenes. I will say during the second one, when the lady, the woman character was reading the erotic portion of
reading the high literature.
Right. Sorry. High literature can be erotic. Okay. The erotic portion of professor's work to the professor, I like kept pausing it and sending snapshots of the subtitles to my friends and being like, look at this, guys. Did you watch it on
Canopy as well?
No, I paid $3 for it on Amazon Prime to rent.
Why would you do that when you have Canopy, one of the greatest resources?
Because I've forgotten that I have Canopy. That's why.
So I guess I don't know about your subtitle experience, but my subtitle experience was very much like reading the block of words and then reassembling them to make sense in my head on Canopy, because it would be like but comma, and then it would say like the end of the sentence, and then it would say the beginning of the sentence, which is a direct translation of the Japanese, and then I'd have to like rethink like what they're saying, and there's certain sentimental portions where I don't actually know the order of operations to what was said.
Interesting. That's really interesting. No, I think mine were pretty like they were switched to follow the grammar of English, whereas, subject or object, all that. That's really, wow. I wish I had taken more linguistics classes in college. Cause I think that would be really interesting. Cause mine was very straightforward. So I didn't have any of that, but I am, excuse me, I am curious, to know, how something like that affects things, especially if you're reading literature, like obviously translation, especially
it's super important,
right? And especially, it's not like it's from a romantic language like Italian to English or something where it's like kind of similar. It's like, no, it's a completely different alphabet, it's a completely different writing style.
It's a different way of interpreting a word here, a word there changes the.
So I mean, just the like by the time we received it, it's gone through so many different changes. Like it is,
and the amount of subtlety to, I think the second two acts. I think the first act is pretty self-explanatory, and less there. It leaves less to be interpreted. But the second one, where that the scene that you're talking about that starts with her reading this and her trying to seduce him, and then by the end of it, it turns into like this verbal like intimacy. Just the way that plays out. The words really matter there.
Yes.
And I think that the same is true of the latter portion.
Yeah, I agree. And that's interesting because, like I was saying, I appreciated this movie. But I do wonder, like, if I knew Japanese, like, would my emotional connection be deeper?
Yes.
Because there is always, I mean, no matter what, there's always going to be distance if you don't understand the language that you're speaking and you're only understanding through subtitles. Which doesn't mean because I have had plenty of things that I've watched subtitles that have really affected me emotionally, but there's still like, you miss the nuances, you miss, if you can't analyze someone reading a piece of literature, you can't analyze the prose used there because you're like, well, they have a completely different way of writing these things, and structuring it. You can't be like, oh, well, because of the structure, it's can't even remember any of the words I learned in AP English, but anyway, so that's very interesting about your subtitles. I'm intrigued by that.
It definitely made my brain engage with it more. That's one of the things that I do like about subtitles, is that it turns a movie kind of into the experience of like curling up with a really good book if you like the movie.
Right.
And watching this movie, what I did was I watched it on my laptop in bed because I just didn't want to like dedicate having to sit up and watch it late at night. I wanted to be able to lay down. And so it really felt intimate, like I was reading these short stories which had visual aids. And I just found them very beautiful. It's certain people have certain things. You have the MCU, and reading Hamaguchi's subtitles while I watch his films is just, it's one of the favorite things that I've done in the last few years with cinema. So I had a very, very better time than you did.
I still had a good time, just to clarify. It
Yeah,
wasn't like
this is like probably the best movie I've seen this year from including last year. So last year and this year, this would be my number one of 2021, 2022 that I've seen this year. Not better than Drive My Car, obviously.
Yeah. Oh, of course. What tickled your fancy so much?
I would say the intimacy of the relationships that are being put to screen. Those one takes are very casual.
Yes.
They're not forced. They're not 1917 absurd technical feats that end up sacrificing the stakes of the film.
I love 1917
to pull off a very impressive technical feat. Instead, it's like an intimate portrait, like the scene in the car at the beginning of the film, where these two friends are catching up, and the just out of focus depth of Shibuya behind them is just gorgeous as the car traces a line down the road and back. And the interplay of these two characters as she listens to her best friend tell her that she just met and essentially fell in love with her best friend's ex-boyfriend.
Yeah.
It's just deeply arresting, and it's so personal that it really does feel like reading the best short stories. Like, it feels like I'm reading a Raymond Carver short story, but it's being put to cinema, or something like that. And I just really respond, especially to the storytelling modes of short stories. And I think that they're really well suited in certain directors' hands to be adapted, less so with novels, because short stories are so active, tense, and they're very visual. And I think Hamaguchi takes the appropriate amount of risks in adapting them and making them very personal.
Did you have a favorite of the three stories?
I've been stewing on that, and I don't think I do, because I appreciate certain things about them. Like, I think that conversation at the beginning that I was just talking about is one of the
Mhm.
most beautifully shot sequences in the whole film, if not the most beautiful. But I think that the conversation that happens between the professor and the student and the second is the most powerful conversation. But I think the consequences of the conversation at the end of Act 3 to each character are the most consequential and like meaningful of all the interactions that we see. So I think that each one really has its own literature type thing working for its characters and its moments. But yeah, I just was really arrested by the control that he had. And I mean, what a perfect title. It is kind of like a wheel, and it is fortune and fantasy, like all the way through.
What's the because isn't the literal translation different? Hold on, I'm about to
Oh, it
Google
very
this.
well could be. I hadn't looked into
believe-
any of it.
Yes,
After
chance
watching
and
Drive My Car, I
imagination.
was like, I just need to take a break because this is so good. Chance and imagination.
Yes.
Okay. That's also a perfect. Yeah, that's fantastic, because the beginning of the film is very much the best friend imagining what her future could be like. The second, it is reliant on chance for its outcome, and the third is simultaneously both, very effectively. And they use imagination with their chance meeting to change their personal stories and forgive themselves and kind of work through stuff. It's very, very beautiful. Yeah, I really like these like deep romantic textual things put to film in this way. It's very Eric Romer slice of life, singular characters being depicted over a transporting day event, or however you want to frame the time.
I think I know is kind of like joking about the erotic bits of the second one where she's just reading that, and I was like kind of shooting the shit, but like not really, because I think that was actually my favorite portion, because of, like you said, like the verbal intimacy that these two people achieve. And it's I don't know, that's like such an interesting connection, because it's so deep, but they never do anything. They never touch. And there's specifically like, I thought it was so funny when she started to read that, and the students come out in the hallway, and she goes to close the door, and the professor just like really awkwardly reaches around her and opens the door back
it was
up.
full like, this is deeply uncomfortable, awkward, The Office moment.
It was awesome. I was like, that's great.
Yeah, as I was sitting there, I was like, this is so uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, it was
move
like
faster, open the door
to sit
faster,
through.
get this over.
Yeah. Like I think, but specifically, I think that like my favorite part of that was when she finished reading it, that excerpt, and they just started talking, like that bit from when she stopped reading the excerpt and then led up to, oh, I'm recording you because I was trying to be a honey pot, right? That's what it's called, honey pot, honey trap, whatever.
Yeah, that's how it was translated, was honey pot. But yeah, honey trap is the same idea.
Like that, I don't know. For some reason that was very moving to me. That little bit. And like you said, I think like the long shots, the long takes, that are used throughout this really are so good at just letting the characters and the actors just like breathe and feel really lived in and intimate with one another. And then there are also moments where it will very effectively like do like cut between where it's the characters are kind of looking almost directly at the camera when they're talking to each other. I mean, that's used very sparingly, but I think there's such a control over the way that it's shot that was very, very impressive, I thought.
Yeah, I think that those jump cuts are like really well threaded, because when he changes the frame from both characters or other characters, or a background being in the frame, to that character kind of being alone with what they're saying, it adds this element that you can't get in a short story necessarily, or in a work of narrative that's longer, by by isolating them, you kind of make what they're saying feel like they're expressing something from deeper within themselves without having to say, I'm expressing something from deep within myself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
It's something very special that he, I think, is very good at. And it really spoke to me in Drive My Car, how he would frame the characters. To me, the not to talk about a totally different film, but the scene of the driver at her old home where her mother died, and just the isolation and the far shot of that, it just was deeply affecting. And I think he does something similar here with how he shows the changing city in Act 1 through the rear view window of the car. He never really is drawing attention to it, but there's like all these lights and construction happening in the background, and simultaneously both these characters are undergoing these major structural changes in their lives. So I think that there's like these elements that are really rich, that are visually intuitive to the characters, but he's not really hitting our head with them. He's just presenting them. And if we want to add that into our reading, we're more than welcome to.
This is a legit question because I didn't know what to think of this, but at the end of the first story, because it ends with the girl.
Talking about the Hong Sang-soo zoom shot?
Yeah.
Where she does like does one thing and then the Hong Sang-soo zoom happens, the digital zoom in, and then it snaps back and then she's like back at the table and makes a different choice.
No, I loved that though.
I did too.
That was really cool. No, afterwards, because after she makes the choice to leave and not throw her friend's new relationship into chaos, the final shot of that sequence where she leaves and goes and just like takes a picture of the city in the morning, and that's how it ends. I didn't really know what to make of that because I just kind of figured it would end with her. I don't know. Like it felt like a weird like coda to the movie. Not weird, but it was a very deliberate choice to end with her taking that picture instead of earlier when she had left and made that decision. It was like, no, we're going to continue this just a little bit more. But I had really genuinely had no idea what to make of it. I was like, is it, I don't know. The city is nice. It looked cool. I don't know if you had any thoughts.
My reading is that that's one of those things that he does for other people to put themselves in. Like, how do I want to read that? I think that it's really characteristic to the character. I think it's just a behavior that he imagined that character would exhibit probably. But if I was to try to like get inside of that version of her that didn't tell the truth, that's like one of my maybe small hangups, is that the girl that confronted her ex-boyfriend on an impulse that then left and ran away is now making that behavior change. So maybe it's a resetting of control. Maybe it's exhibiting some sort of control over the city itself that she was just being driven through and was really at the whims of itself. If I wanted to give it that sensibility, but at some level, I think that she just wants to be distracted.
Yeah. Okay. I literally, because I was like, why is she taking a picture of the city? I don't know. Because the others, I was like, yeah, that's why it ended here. That one, I was like, okay, well, thank you.
One thing that I didn't like, but I really appreciated, was in Act 2, where near the end, after we go forward 5 years, she's on the bus with the boy that she was going to honey pot with, and she declines to give him her card, all that stuff, and then she's getting up to go, and she kisses him. And like, I simultaneously don't like that for obvious reasons for that character, but I also love that, like, who that character told the professor she was is who she is, and like that consistency and richness, I think, really adds depth. And the wrinkle of watching him watch her walk as the bus drives by is just it adds a really unique layer that I don't see very often in contemporary cinema.
Yeah. The ending of that one really was a bummer. I have to say. I was like, damn. this poor sweet professor man had to leave. This woman got a divorce. Oh my god. That bummed me out.
Yeah,
That's all I'm saying.
that's why I just genuinely like literature that bums me out.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, why I like films like this and Romaire's films, and just any slice of life film that's like really accurately depicting a human life, and then it just kind of ends on a bummer. I tend to be like, that's great. I love that.
That's life. Yeah. Oh man.
You were talking a little bit about language and how that translates in the film. Do you think that the dialogue sequences were too trite, or did you feel like you were invested in the whole time through your translation?
No, I think I was invested. It like, I mean, like, you know, like I've said, there's definitely a weird disconnect, especially I feel like if a language doesn't follow like the grammatical structure of English, like, you know, you're reading along with the subtitles and you're expecting the inflections to kind of go along with how you're doing it in your head, and that doesn't happen.
Yeah, the timing doesn't sync.
Right. And you're kind of like, oh my god, like what's going on here? But no, I would say, like, I don't think it was too trite or anything. I'm trying to think of things. Like I didn't have an issue at all with the translation. It's more, you know, it's just a fun exercise to be like, wow, well, what would, you know, how does this happen? Like, how do we get from this in Japanese to this in English? Crazy talk. But I mean, listen, I had no issues, but I'm also not a linguist. So did you have any issues?
No, well,
I mean, aside from the out of order.
Well, the out of order, I think, made me reframe everything in my head. So it was like even more of a reading experience, which I actually appreciated more, right? Watching RRR, it's like, this is a description, this is a description, this is a description, or direct translation. And there was a lot more room for me to infer and interpret, which I really like having to contend with and comprehend the pieces of art that I'm interacting with. Don't get me wrong, it's very fun to watch leopards be thrown at police officers, but there's something very meaningful to having to put yourself into the story and translate how you would interpret that emotion or sensibility yourself, because it ends up putting you into the art instead of just being a bystander. You know, that's meaningful and my sensibility, but it's certainly not everyone's sensibility. Yeah, is there anything else that you wanted to go over in the title? Was there any scene or character that stood out other than those that we mentioned?
I mean, really, like I said, I think the second one was the one that stuck the most with me. Gosh, I feel like there should be. Do you have something else?
Oh, I will say that the final sequence, I don't remember the name of that character in the final sequence, but I did not respond well to her for about the first half of that portion. I was like, this is boring. She's just a character that's searching for someone. What is really the purpose of all of this? And then through the interaction that happens on the escalators and both of them thinking that it's someone that they know.
Yeah.
That really drew something out of that character and made me completely change my perspective. And that's something that I really like in film, when I can have a reading or a emotion about it or a character, and then it changes what it's doing and it completely changes the way that I feel. And that just really underlines what we've already said, which is that he's great at controlling this film.
Yeah. I will say though about the third one, I thought it was really interesting how there was the background was that like no one used computers that much anymore because of some virus, and it was just this like really interesting touch of not really sci-fi, but I don't know what other word I would use.
Yeah,
for it.
like lo-fi sci-fi. It's like just a very like almost Cronenbergian thing where just the detail of this world is
Yeah.
that I read all
And-
of my husband's emails.
Yeah. But like that
And
was
we
such
order
a
Blu-ray animes because we can't
right
stream them.
physical media. Like that was really interesting to me, and just seeing, because obviously it was a very subtle thing, because it was just part of the world and people had learned to deal with it. So it was very interesting to see like the subtle ways that it affected people. You know, like she was, for like when the main character was going to her high school reunion, she was holding a slip of paper with the directions as opposed to like an email or something. And it never was something that was really discussed or had a huge impact on what happened. But it was just that little bit of world building that was really effective, even if it was not, you know, earth shattering or had any huge consequences for the characters, other than like, well, I mean, like this woman read her husband's emails where he was thinking about his high school girlfriend, and then the other woman, the main woman, currently was out of a job because she works in IT and couldn't do that anymore. But that was something that I really appreciated.
Yeah, that's one of the elements that changed as you figure that out. It changes how the first half played for me. Things that seemed like just kind of unnecessary became very meaningful. If you remember, after the reunion, she just goes home or goes to the hotel room, one of the two.
Yeah.
And she closes the door and she just jumps on the bed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really inconsequential, except for every film since iPhones, the person jumps in bed with their phone.
Yeah.
And then gets on the phone and starts looking up the people that they were just at the thing with.
Yeah.
And here, all she can do is sit in her own emotions and anxieties.
Yeah.
It's those little wrinkles. That's a great point, that end up changing the reading of how what you've seen actually plays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was great. That point was great. So I mean, like I said, you know, even if I wasn't super emotionally connected, I thought it was very well done. And I thought there were definitely moments throughout the film where I was like, wow, this is, you know, very good. And I enjoy this aspect of it a lot. Yeah.
I do too. I think that as a writer, he's incredible. And as a director, I mean, this is only 2 movies in, but I get the sense that, you know, this is probably one of our modern masters. You know, we've been wondering where they are. And, you know, Clint Eastwood, not really a master, but he's not long for this world. Scorsese, not long for this world. Spielberg, not long for this world. So it's like, who are the next masters? You know, Inarritu, maybe, Del Toro, probably not. So it's interesting to see global cinema kind of rise up and announce these new masters, especially with streaming and how these are all available. You know, it's going to be really interesting to see how artists without the separation of countries are able to become popular in nations outside of their own.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about RRR earlier and how popular that was. And
continuing.
Yeah. And then, you know, another, obviously, a Hamaguchi film did, you know, got a lot of Oscar nominations. So anyway, but I do very much, I mean, I think it's great that we've gotten more global with movies, especially, I mean, just on a personal note, because I would not watch some of these movies if they weren't, you know, it's just is so much easier. So I'm like, okay, well, if I wanted to watch Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, I just gotta plug it in on the internet, and there it is.
Boot up Canopy.
RRR. Yeah. So yeah, all good things.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to go over, or should we wrap it up there?
No, I think I've said my piece. Yeah, you know, unfortunately, Taika Waititi, not a new master, at least judging from his most recent effort. So we'll see. Taika, if you're listening, you're on thin ice with me.
We will see. Thank you so much for joining me, Anna.